Hi everyone and welcome to your horoscope for the week of June 15th, 2020. We have a really active and a very powerful sky playing out all throughout the week, where we finally have some very major energy shifts taking place one after another. So potentially this week is going to change the overall feeling of this period, but of course, not all of these energy shifts are going to be that much delightful, especially for those of us who don't really enjoy a Mercury retrograde period, because it is always associated with stagnation, procrastination, the necessity to reanalyze, rethink, recall, every word that starts with re is more or less applicable for a Mercury retrograde. But I do think that this one has so much potential of healing, of clarity, of giving us that time and space and inner balance necessary to just reconfigure ourselves emotionally, where we finally leave all past baggage behind and just step into our futures. But before we can step into our futures, we have to create it. But at the very end of the week, we have a super powerful solar eclipse taking place in 0 degrees of Cancer, which is a really, really powerful karmic moment when we can literally, one way or another, create a fantastic new beginning for ourselves individually, but also collectively. But of course, I'm going to be talking about this in more detail later on in this horoscope. Another energy shift is the sun leaving the sign of Gemini and entering into the sign of Cancer, but as soon as it does this movement, it immediately forms the new moon solar eclipse phenomenon in 0 degrees of Cancer, and at the same time, it takes place on the 21st of the month, which is the time of the summer solstice. So this energy is going to be really, really powerful, because the solstice in itself means that the veil between the worlds is that much thinner. The eclipse itself thins it, and this is a very special fire ring eclipse where the sun cannot be eclipsed perfectly by the moon because it is that far away from our planet, so it will be visible as a big ring of fire. And that represents that it's very much action oriented. But before we get there, before we get this celestial opportunity, there is so much emotional energy to navigate out from, and this is basically the beginning of the week where we are still heavily influenced by that Mars conjunct Neptune, and both of them squaring the Sun in the sign of Gemini. Now, I have talked about this celestial dance in my previous horoscopes, where collectively this energy is playing out as an overflow, excessive flow of information. And that information is very Neptunian in the present moment, meaning that it contains really significant truths and perfectly viable and valid perspectives, but it's all mixed with half-truths, deception, illusions, even naivety, even our wishful thinking. But of course, this is where the deception made with perfectly valid intent by those people who wish to, keep us in the dark, all of that is going to provoke a very, very strong reaction from all of us. And this side of this energy is already playing out and has already played out the last couple of weeks. And you can see that in the protests. You can see that in, this very relevant karmic symbolism, the sacrifice of George Floyd, so to speak, the martyr, where it just evoked that ancestral trauma, that collective trauma of the slavery, of, that chapter of humanity's history where things were pretty dark, pretty grim, pretty unfair and unjust. But you can also see how that evocation of that trauma was turned into a political, spiritual, psychological warfare. So it created a lot of strife, a lot of aggression, because Neptune meeting Mars, it is the power of spiritual aggression. And yes, sometimes this is actually real, it can be done. When you focus emotions in a very assertive way, well, it has a massive effect on everything, because you project your own anger, your own hurts, your own wounds, your own traumas. And on one hand, it does produce an empathic effect, because those people, that group or government or whatever you're projecting it towards, will see your perspective, your feelings, your point of view, but there's absolutely no guarantee that they're going to respond in a very positive way. And that is why, personally, this energy played out in a totally different manner, where it just evoked our self-victimization tendencies, our weaknesses, our repressed emotions, traumas, old hurts, old pains, and all of that. And it, invited us, almost forced us to confront it and put a stop to it. But it wasn't that easy, because Neptune is still illusion. It is still pretty much wishful thinking. And if we were deeply wounded in the past, it doesn't matter in which manner or what caused that wound, we still feel it very alive inside of us today. And that is what we have to put a stop to, the enlivening of the negativity, of the hurt and the wound. That is how we stop the trauma, because we stop investing feelings, emotions, and energy towards it. And that is how it cannot be alive anymore. It will just turn to what it has always should have been, just a memory, just a chemical imprint in the brain, and nothing more. Now, for other people, this energy was that of massive confusion, where they didn't even know who they were anymore. They just didn't know what they desired of life. For some people, it actually turned into severe self-criticism. For others, depression, escapist tendencies. For others still, very illusionary, self-deluding, toxic positivity, where we just ignore reality and just believe what we want to believe, and there's nothing and no one that can change that. So this energy played out in a totally different manner for different people, but ultimately the main purpose is for us to adapt to the present moment reality, to cut ties with the past. It has to become that much more aware to all of us that the identity who we attributed to ourselves, which is due to education, to conditioning, to our families, to our history, to our life conditions, to our social conditions, etc. That is basically not us anymore, because we are free. Our awareness, our awakening, our education, self-education, not something that was forced down on our throats. Self-education and research and our own knowledge of psychology, our deep knowledge of the self, everything helped us to see the person who we actually aren't anymore. So basically, this is an episode of what modern mystics call the ego death, where our identity just vanished and it left us, in a state of somewhat confusion, or simply not knowing who it is that we are, who it is that we are embodying. But this isn't necessarily negative, and that's why it wasn't that negative for many people, because you don't need to know who you are as long as you can feel who you are. And this is also Venus retrograde in the sign of Gemini. When your mind cannot palpably, rationally, logically perceive something, well, that's no problem at all, because the heart, Venus in the sign of Gemini, also has an intelligence of its own, and many times we can appeal to our non-linear logic, to our non-linear way of thinking, and we have many answers there as well. But in order for that to function in a very positive manner, this is Neptune in the sign of Pisces, our faith, our ideals, our connection to source has to be healthy, adaptable, not rigid, open to new, open to adaptation. So this major theme of the necessity to adapt, to be versatile, to be open to change and leave our comfort zone when it is necessary. This is basically the major theme of this Mars, Neptune and Sun square. So this is going to continue at the very beginning of the week, but this is where we're also going to have a totally different kind of energy. On one hand, that Jupiter retrograde and Pluto retrograde in the sign of Capricorn are getting closer and closer to one another, where their conjunction is very close to being exact. I think Pluto is in 24 degrees of Capricorn, while Jupiter is in 25, getting that much closer to Pluto. And Saturn from Aquarius is also moving into, slowly but surely, into Capricorn, because it has passed 1 degree of that sign already. So this is setting up the stage for another very powerful conjunction between that Jupiter and Pluto, which is deconstructing centralized power. But this time, because it is retrograde, the deconstruction depends that much on us individually, because both of these planets are retrograde. So the power and ultimately the truth of that Jupiter is in our hands. So if we stop supporting, we stop believing, we stop trusting centralized power and all the organizations and big companies, big pharma, everything that has to do with the symbolism of Capricorn, including religious institutions. If we stop supporting that, where we withdraw our power, our trust, the belief that we invested into them, that is going to be producing very significant results, both karmically and both as a direct consequence of us stopping supporting them. So we are going to be seeing important truths being revealed on the world stage, and the exposure of the corruption, of the, nepotism, of the flaws and weaknesses of centralized power are definitely going to be an ongoing theme here. But we also have a beautiful sextile, a harmonious celestial conversation between that Jupiter conjunct Pluto and Neptune conjunct Mars. And Mars and Pluto is the higher octave, the superior expression of that Mars. So this is a very action-oriented aspect, where the action is basically inner power, inner choices, inner decisions, just finding the will to do this and that, whatever you find in yourself that is aligned with your desires, with your soul purpose, whatever you find worthy to invest your inner power into. So this is where dreaming big or actually doing inner work, deciding for yourself where you want to invest the power of your faith and belief and your inner power. Now that is going to produce massive changes. For example, karmic manifestations, information clarity reaching you in an unexpected manner. Help can be offered to you in a very, unexpected, surprising ways, because, Jupiter in the sign of Capricorn can represent help from a highly influential person, but you will need to ask, you will need to reach out, you will need to communicate, so to speak. And very powerful karmic moments, karmic episodes, karmic progress can be made under this sky, because, Pluto sextiling Neptune is a very mysterious divine energy that can, Pluto also being in the sign of Capricorn, the manifester, so this can enter reality in a flash very suddenly, as long as the inner setup, the inner psychological configuration is matching that energy. And also the sextile is going to be a supremely inspirational guidance for artists, for spiritualists, for big dreamers, thinkers, visionaries. And also if you have like a very significant artistic creation, for example, you invested a lot of time and energy into it, and of course you also see the beauty in it, you see the value, the worth in it, well, promoting it or taking any action in this sense can represent a moment of breakthrough, hitting the karmic jackpot, so to speak. So this is a very magical and reactive energy. And at the same time, right at the beginning of the week, we also have a quincunx, a minor astrological configuration, which links together two areas of life which have absolutely nothing to do with each other. So we have a quincunx between the Sun and that Pluto conjunct Jupiter, and that can be the energy of big surprises, communication, news reaching us, but that news, is not going to be very clear, very direct, very straightforward. So it can, send us into false hopes, or it can shock us. But ultimately, if we invest a little bit of time to process it and work with this energy, we can actually use it to our greatest advantage, because, quincunx between the Sun in Gemini, that Pluto and Jupiter in Capricorn, can represent unexpected, surprising job offers, invitation to join a project, offers of help, or anything that has to do with, career, work, the symbolism of Capricorn. But the problem is, it might not match your needs, your requirements, it might not resonate. So that is why thinking it through and trusting your intuition is going to be so very important to use this energy towards your greatest advantage. And on the world stage, this can also play out as very surprising, shocking news, but which are going to be changing, evolving, becoming something totally different as time passes. And also, on the 18th of the month, Mercury will stand still in the sky and go retrograde the next day, where the retrograde finishes on the 13th of July. And until that time, we have a very emotional Mercury retrograde in the emotional sign of Cancer. Now, of course, Mercury in the sign of Cancer is not the most comfortable energy, because Cancer is not that quick. Mercury is pretty drowned by emotions, especially emotions which have to do with family, friends, deep soul level connections. So that changes the game totally. Because, that kind of heightened love does blind us so very many different ways. But that is where we might not need a very, rational approach to this, because Mercury in the sign of Cancer is a very heightened and sharp emotional intelligence, the energy of understanding, the energy of the psychologist basically, who can figure out what is going on in the heart and ultimately mind of another person. And this is also the energy of very sharp intuition, that gut feeling, where you just intuitively, emotionally know what is right, what is wrong, and all of that. You know what you have to decide, you know what choice you have to make. But of course, before we get there, at the start of this Mercury retrograde, it is all going to be an average Mercury retrograde, where paperwork, documentation, the flow of information, communication reaches a standstill. It will definitely stagnate. So it is not a good time to make sudden decisions, to, accept legally binding choices on the long term, to sign a very relevant contracts, to make huge investments on the long term. It is all advised to wait until Mercury finally ends its retrograde on the 13th of July. But a Mercury retrograde is very ideal to reevaluate, to rethink, to process more deeply, even to split the hair in four and to overthink, because this is the window of opening when it is actually productive, when it is actually useful, especially if all of that has an emotional element to it. The sign of Cancer, the home of the moon, so the home of the soul, our emotional worlds. It is a very good energy to heal the past, to heal our emotions, to, strengthen our bonds with our families, with our soulmates, with our local community, the people who we consider to be our own, like-minded people who we share a big purpose with, for example. It can also represent our immediate society that we belong to. It can represent local community. It can represent our culture. It can also represent our ethnic origins. It can also represent, for example, for those who are single but need to, establish a family, to have a family of their own. This can be a very profound inner reconfiguration when they just figure out what they need to do differently to obtain this very important goal of theirs. Or, for example, if there is any conflict or, big emotional battles in the family, for example, like grudges and for example, family members not speaking to one another because of some kind of silly argument or a clash of principles or philosophies, life views, etc. This energy can be really, really good for healing that, for finding forgiveness, or for finding closure, of course. And on the world stage, one way it's definitely going to be playing out, it is going to be about, skin color, ethnic origins, cultures, borders, healthcare systems, for example, because Mercury is a planet which has much to do with healing, with healthcare professionals, and Cancer is the sign of the nurturer, so it's also going to have a health care or, medical element to it, maybe an upgrade, maybe a reevaluation, reconfiguration, readaptation. So even though this Mercury retrograde is going to slow things down considerably, it still has a very, very big healing potential and the potential to reach emotional clarity, to crystallize within ourselves how we truly feel about so very many things that might have to do with the sign of Cancer. And also, Cancer can represent your physical house, the actual home where you live in. So it can be also time to redecorate, to swap houses, to move, to buy a house, to change or upgrade your living conditions, to rethink everything. So this energy has a lot of potential in it, but we have to go slowly and work with what we have and, take each day as it comes and not rush into things, because Mercury in the sign of Cancer definitely requires patience, tolerance, and understanding. Now, talking about the sign of Cancer, on the 21st of the month, we have a very powerful solar eclipse / new moon taking place at 0 degrees in the sign of Cancer. Now, this eclipse is going to be really powerful and really, really significant for a number of different reasons. Now, the first reason is definitely that it's taking place exactly on summer solstice. And the solstice involves that the veil between the worlds is that much thinner. That is when we, can get connected much easier to the divine mind, to the intelligence of the universe. And that is why the ancients always celebrated this very special moment, because, it gave them the opportunity to, to plant their own seeds of intention, what they desire for the next cycle of 3 months into the universe. So celebrations and all the offerings and all the ritualistic and symbolic gestures were meant to prepare basically the next cycle. But if this wasn't enough, an eclipse in itself is also associated when the veil between the worlds are that much thinner, and a solar eclipse always represents a fantastic and really powerful new beginning, especially this one because it takes place in 0 degrees of Cancer, and 0 degree is critical degree. The symbolism of the planets there is that much heightened. So a new moon, the conjunction of sun and the moon, is definitely a creational energy. It is definitely something new entering into this world. But Cancer is also one of the most nurturing, fertile signs, the cosmic primordial soup. So it is that much more reactive to anything new and ultimately to our own desires, especially if the way that which we express that desire is emotional. It is based on feelings. It is based on the matters of the heart. And of course, it takes place, on the world axis. There's 0 degrees of Cancer. So it is linked to initiation, innovation, actually birthing something new based on what we believe, based on what we wish to accomplish. And at the same time, it's also conjunct, outer sign conjunction, with the North Node in the sign of Gemini. So either way we look at it, it doesn't matter because it still promotes a very powerful new beginning and progress. And if Gemini has so much to do with our mental spheres, with our intellect, with the practicality of our minds, with our learning abilities, with the information that we store inside of us, well then Cancer is our emotions, the matters of the heart, how we feel and what we conserve inside our hearts. Even our parental instincts, the instinct to nurture, to care, to heal, to take care of another human being. So this is a very, very compassionate energy. And, if we think about the big picture, well, if the Pluto and Saturn conjunction, which symbolically, karmically brought on this whole coronavirus and economic and social and political turmoil situation, well, if that did anything major for all of us collectively, well, that was to spark up our compassion, our solidarity, our human spirit, so to speak. So that is extremely powerful because we were awakened emotionally for a very powerful, significant, and potent reason, and that is to use all of this energy, compassionate energy that we find inside ourselves in this present moment, to create that fantastic new beginning, or to contribute with our own energies, with our own emotions, the power of our dreams, so to speak, towards that very powerful new beginning that is going to take place over the next 6 months of our lives. But this new moon / solar eclipse is forming an outer sign square with Mars in the sign of Pisces. So it will require us to stand from a place of emotional clarity. And this doesn't mean that we will have to have everything figured out. No, absolutely not. It only means that we will have to stand from a place where we know that the past was the past and there is no way going back, and it is also insignificant anymore. So it will require us to stand from a place of freedom where the past or anything inside of us cannot shackle us down anymore, cannot, make us deceive ourselves or live in a life of illusion. If we stand from such a place of emotional clarity, well then that means that there's so much energy, free energy inside of us, because we would use that inner psychological subconscious energy to just dwell on the past, to make sure that trauma is so very much alive inside of us. But if we already closed that issue, if we already resolved it, well then that energy is free for us to use as we wish. And if we invested into our dreams, dreaming our futures into existence, Mars in Pisces basically, and this squares this new moon phenomenon, well then we influence the future that is being birthed, that is being created in the sign of Cancer. Later on, in the next couple of weeks, when Mars actually exits the sign of Pisces and is going to enter its home sign of Aries, making it that much more powerful and influential, the very first thing that Mars is going to be doing is holding a conversation of tension, a square between itself and the eclipse point, 0 degrees of Cancer, where this new moon phenomenon took place. And even though at that time no planets are going to be there, still, if it converses this way in that karmic point where that eclipse took place, well, it's going to represent a massive influence to however that new beginning is going to be created. And of course, there is tension, frustration, the necessity to take action in the air. But ultimately, that is just going to make sure that we will know what we wish for ourselves. Because Mars in the sign of Aries is the energy of the inner warrior. And the inner warrior in the sign of Aries, they're going to be fighting for whatever they came here to do in this life, because Aries is the primordiality. It is the primordial expression of who it is that we are. So we are definitely going to be fighting for our own unique individual purposes, even if that might not be that very clear inside of our minds. But this is where our instincts are definitely going to be steering us in the way that we just have to go in our own personal journeys. And also at the very end of the week, we have a trine. Even though it isn't perfect, it isn't exact, a trine is a supremely harmonious celestial conversation between Neptune retrograde and Saturn retrograde. And this can be an energy of blessings, it can be a breakthrough, it can be karmic harvest, it can be help, it can be, manifestation, it can be, reaping the fruits of your labor, especially if that labor was intellectual in nature, or artistic, Venus, or financial investment, or some kind of tactic that you followed. But it can also represent the energy of grounding, of realism, where that Venus in the sign of Gemini is still very dual, it is still very wishy-washy, so to speak, and this is where Saturn can give it a stability, can align it with realism, with the truth, and that is already a major blessing in itself, because it means inspired action. It means that our minds and hearts are going to be working towards our greatest good. And also Saturn is definitely self-value, self-worth, knowing your true value and acting from such a place, and that is definitely a blessing. Now, if this wasn't enough, that new moon phenomenon is also going to be forming a quincunx, a minor astrological aspect with Saturn, so that can also mean a lot of surprises, a lot of progress and breakthrough and help coming your way, but it might not be very visible, it might not be that clear in your sphere of awareness. So this aspect might be that of blessings, but it can also be very awkward situations where there is help, but the help is not actually useful to you. But anyway, if you'd like to find out more about this eclipse and its potential manifestation, we're going to be having a separate article towards the end of next week. Well, thank you so much for listening. Everyone a blessed and magical next week. And my advice is that please use the potential that the 21st of the month is going to be offering to all of us individually and also collectively, where we need to tap into the creative, the fertile, the divine, basically, energies of that eclipse, of the sun entering into the sign of Cancer, and also that Mercury retrograde being there, that is a very, very potent creational energy where we can plant seeds of intention based especially on what we wish to experience emotionally in the future. So if you're into meditations, if you're into any kind of magical practice or activity where you just make your wish, where you just dream your future into existence, well, that is going to be the best possible day to do this work, regardless how you choose. Anything that just appeals to you, enchants your heart, everything that gives you that relaxed and spiritually empowered state that you need. And also for group and mass meditations, this is also the very, 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 very best energy possible, because Cancer is the power of the people. Cancer is interhuman connections from an emotional perspective. The culture that we belong to, values that so very many people share with one another. The power of compassion, the power of love, emotional responsibility. All of this belongs to the sign of Cancer. So if you believe in mass meditations, well, this is definitely the moment when it's going to be at its most powerful. I don't organize anything like that, but if you know someone who does, or if you get an invitation to take part in an online group meditation or whatever, then that is definitely a very powerful tool that the universe offers all of us to shape the collective reality. If there was a most relevant and exact symbol of what the power of the people actually means astrologically and spiritually, well, this eclipse is definitely going to be that. So I advise everyone to use this magical, spiritual, cosmic opening to create the future that we would like to experience together. Thank you once again. Until next time, bye for now.